Josh Satin, farmer and now extreme camera extraordinaire. Welcome to the Golden Hour podcast yet again.
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here. I can't believe, I don't know, last time we talked, I couldn't believe how long it was in between the times that we recorded for the podcast. So thanks for having me back, Dave.
Yes, absolutely. Is this your third time, or I know I was on yours and then you're on mine and then were you on it again? I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is the third time.
Cool. Well, Josh and I have been talking with each other a lot over the last couple of months, ever since the new Canon R5C started shipping. Josh has ordered one. I have been using the C70 now for over a year. It's still my primary workhorse. And then Josh, you went through like a bunch of Sony gear, but then you sold it and bought Canon stuff again. So yeah, but then not only that, but you've been building a camera gear specific YouTube channel alongside your farming channel. You've got a lot of changes going on in your life with the farming kind of world. Can you kind of just give us the synopsis of Josh Satin as of right now?
Sure,
You know, summer
little update
2022.
in my life.
Yeah, what's going on?
Farming channel is good. Hit 200,000 subscribers, which is like completely mind blowing. Thanks,
Very
Dave.
nice.
Took
That's
me
awesome, man.
3 years from start to 200K. So it's been a
Wow.
wild ride. I'm actually in the middle of doing a free farming course over on that channel, which is totally sponsored. So I'm able to give it away completely for free, which is completely unheard of in the
Wow.
farming space. So it's a 19-week farming course. I'm doing live Q&As every week. So that's been kind of taking up most of my time right now. I'm putting a good amount of time into that. But as you said, my other channel, which is focused on camera gear, content creation, videography, those kinds of things, is something I'm trying to put more effort into as time goes on. I think I want to put more energy into that in the future. So as you said, I've been back and forth with camera brands. I think I've just come to realize that I kind of like all the cameras. Like I don't want to like stick in one world. And that
Yeah.
kind of is confusing for me because I can't afford to keep all the cameras. So yeah, I've been back and forth Canon to Sony twice round trip now. So now I have Canon cameras.
Round trip. That's a good way
Yeah.
to put it.
Yeah.
Well, cautionary tale from a former camera gear reviewer. That sickness never seems to go away. And often, at least when I was cycling through things, I would have a Nikon body, a Sony, and a Canon with different lenses just all over the place. Becomes a mess. And it wasn't until I got robbed and like $40,000 worth of my stuff was stolen that I kind of was like, wait a minute. I had I had 7 cameras that person stole. And obviously it was, a traumatic experience, obviously broke into my home. But that aside, I kind of had to realize like, actually, I don't need 7 cameras. Like 2 is enough. Like 2 is already kind of like all you really need if you're going to air quote it. I do think 2 of the same brand is essential for most people because you want to have a backup camera. And it doesn't have to be a great version of that. You don't have to have 2 C70s. You could have literally like an EOS R and a C70 or an EOS R and a, 80D, whatever you can afford. I do think having 2 is crucial, but no more than 2 is really necessary for most people. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I kind of live in the between 2 and 3 world. Like when I have 3 cameras, I'm like, do I really need 3 cameras? And when I have 2, I'm constantly like, I think I need another camera. So it depends though. And like for me, I've been pulling out my phone lately if I need another camera, like if I need to do like record the back of a screen or something like that, or I've even used it for an overhead a few times just because I didn't have enough cameras. But yeah, I think for most people 2 is good. And it is helpful when you have ideally 2 of the same camera, but as you said, like 2 in the same brand with the same brand lenses, I think helps a lot if you're trying to mix footage for sure.
I know when I was a freelancer, this is showing my age, if you will, but I was using the original Blackmagic camera, the 2.5K that was like, it looked like a box. And then I had the original pocket camera. And those were the 2 main cameras that I used, and they were fantastic at the time. And then I sold them and bought the old trusty 1DC. I don't know if you've ever played with this, but this was like in 2011. This was the holy grail camera because at the time there was no cameras that existed in the DSLR form factor that shot 4K. and this camera was $15,000 when it came out, and it had Canon log and continuous recording, without cutting out, which was such a big deal. But it was so dumb. This had no focus peaking or waveforms or any professional video features. It was still just a DSLR that happened to shoot 4K. But I think I bought this a couple of years ago for like $1,500. It shows you how much things depreciate. But I also recently just bought the original C300. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter.
I did,
but
Dave. Did you get it yet?
it should be here in about a week.
Okay.
I posted about it. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I remember that camera. It cost 16 grand when it came out. I shot on it a bunch. It's 1080p only, but it's a 4K sensor that down reses to 1080 internally. So it's really clean, good looking 4K or 1080. And a lot of people were like, dude, that's awesome. That's awesome. And then one guy responded and like, but why? And that one tweet kind of like hit me hard. I'm like, that is a good question. Why did I get it? I don't know why I got it. I think I have a sickness, Josh. I think we have an addiction problem.
I think there's some nostalgia for sure with cameras. I think, especially with certain brands where you're like, oh, and then you get the camera and you're like, why do I have this? This isn't useful for me at the time being,
I think I'm going to just have a play with it. I might make a couple videos, like kind of reminiscing about the nostalgia of it. I can obviously throw this in there as well. Do a whole these were the original cinema cameras in 2011. They were revolutionary for the time. Now here's what we have and how far we've come. I think that's cool. And as we grow and mature in this, and as we are able to afford it, it's kind of like a nerdy collector's habit as well to just kind of collect things. So, but it's so dumb when you look at your shelf and it's like, there's $6,000 sitting on my shelf right now that could be in my bank account if I really want it to be.
Yeah, I don't like keeping that stuff around. If I don't use it, I usually just sell it and get something else and keep moving things around.
It's not like a guitar that kind of like goes up in value over time. Cameras just continue to plummet. So if you really want to buy it again, you could buy it again in 2 or 3 years. It'll be even cheaper, probably.
I think it's also kind of cool to use older cameras sometimes to not just remember what cameras were 5-10 years ago, but also I go back and look. I don't know if you ever do this, Dave. Like look at old footage that you have that you shot on cameras that you wouldn't use anymore. And you just like, for me, I'll be like, oh my God, there was way too much saturation or the color grading was like atrocious. And like take that file and like rework it and then realize like, okay, maybe like you see how your skills have improved too. I want to make a video about that at some point, but that's
a great idea.
Yeah. I'm going to try to do that.
So tell me about your Sony journey, because you kind of jumped ship from Canon. You and I were like big C70 fanboys when we had ours. We bonded on that. Except I shot wide DR, you shot Canon log 2. But hey, I'm a Canon log 2 shooter as well. It's just for the type of stuff I was doing at the time. I didn't want to color grade anything. But you jump ship to the A7S III. I'm a huge fan of that camera as well. Yeah. It's got the cleanest image possible, like just almost no matter what you do, even when you're shooting log, it's just a beautiful, clean, sharp image. Things just stay in focus because the autofocus is amazing. It's full frame. The IBIS is great. It's small. It's compact. The lenses that Sony makes are great. Tell me about your Sony journey, and then also like why you went back to Canon. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I was shooting on the R, and then the R5 came out with all the overheating, and I was really excited about the R5 because, I was just like, this is the camera I want. And then it didn't seem to be usable for video. So wound up, same time A7S III comes out, I'm like, all right, let's just do this. And so I was in the Sony world for a long time and eventually switched over to using an FX3 just because I wanted XLR inputs, and it's just slightly more geared towards video, but it's the same camera as everybody knows. Yeah. I had the FX6 for a little while, which I know we talked about, and it just wasn't the right camera for me at the time.
Which is crazy because they're impossible to get a hold of now.
I know.
The fact that you had it is crazy.
It's crazy, yeah. And so sold it exactly for what I paid for it. Like someone was psyched to pay me. Then, I was shooting Sony for a long time, and then picked up the C70, and I was just like, this camera is incredible. I had an R5 also to sort of use for vlogging, but it just became not my favorite camera for just decreased dynamic range and overheating, obviously, in the 4K HQ mode. And I kind of felt like that combination, the C70 R5, was not the right combo for me for what I needed for doing some documentary work and YouTube stuff. And I was like, you know what, two FX3s like does everything. Like they do, those cameras do everything, and they do everything really well.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of just, I don't know, maybe it was just that we get bored and we want to try something else again. And I
Yeah.
actually sat down and looked through a lot of footage over the last few years and all the videos I made. Every time I came across a video I shot with the C70, I knew right away. I was like, this is my favorite thing. These are the favorite images that I shot in the last 2 years. And so I was
Yeah.
like, all right, I got to get this. I got to get the C70 again. And then when the R5C originally got announced, I was not interested whatsoever because I was shooting on Sony at the time. And
Mhm.
so now I have that camera, and now it's like a whole nother complicated situation between those two cameras for me.
Yeah. And then yeah, I guess you have so yeah, we could get on to the R5C and the selling of the Sony cameras in a minute, but I do think there's something to be said about image quality. And at the end of the day, we, even though we're the ones holding the cameras, using the cameras as YouTubers, we're often filming ourselves. So the way that it works is so crucial for us because it's like the ergonomics, and the A7S and the FX3 are so small, it's easy to use as a YouTuber. But at the end of the day, all those things that we experience as we're using it don't translate on film when you're actually, at least for your farming video, or in my case, for, a YouTube video where I'm not obviously talking about the camera I'm shooting on. It's just the story. It's just whatever you're filming at the end of the day is what is the most crucial. And if you objectively believe that the C70 looks better, even if it's a little heavier and a little bit more expensive and a little bit more complicated to use, the image is better and it makes you happier, and the footage in the long run looks better. Like, is that where you kind of made your decision? Was like, you know what? It's a little bit bigger. It's got a crop sensor. The lenses, the whole situation is kind of annoying, but I just love the image, and the people watching this, they're going to be seeing the image. They're not going to be experiencing what I experience, on the day using the camera. But I mean, that being said, it's got built-in NDs, which is so convenient. The
So
battery life goes forever. You just need like one or two batteries for the whole day usually. Um, I mean, what are your thoughts on just kind of all that,
C70.
the whole
Yeah,
process of the C70?
for me, yeah, like you said, it's the image at the end of the day, obviously. Like, but I think that there's a lot in how it's used, how you are comfortable using it. If the camera can get out of the way a little bit more, and you're not fussing with all sorts of other things,
Mhm.
then you can focus on telling the story. You can focus on getting the image that you need to get. And the C70 does that in a lot of ways when you're behind the camera. It's not, for what I've realized, it's not great for me when I'm in front of the camera. It's just a little too, I mean, if I'm in a studio setting and I put on a tripod and whatever, but if I'm out at all, like it's a little bit too much for me. But the ND
Mhm.
filters is awesome, and yeah, the XLR inputs. But I think the image is the important thing to talk about, because nowadays all these cameras are so good. Like they're
Yes.
so good. And I've matched, like, the R5C with the FX, or the whatever camera I had at the time, FX3. Like you can get them to look exactly the same. Like if you want to put the time into color grade, or you're sending your footage to someone else to color grade, you can make any camera look like any camera at this point for the most part, with shooting
Mhm.
in 10-bit and all this stuff, or raw. But when you're doing YouTube and you're doing quick turnover stuff for clients, or as like, for YouTube, if I can get to that image quicker that I want, that's powerful for me. And that's what I realized coming out of the C70 and the R5C. Like the image is closer to what I personally want. And that's totally subjective. And that's why I chose those cameras.
Yeah, totally. Um, in my case, I've the style that I'm doing now. I'm actually not even operating the camera anymore because I have people filming me. So it's kind of like, hey Connor, you're going to use this camera. I don't care what you think. Like, use it. So that helps. But he has relayed to me. He's like, dude, this camera, like, I know it looks great. I like the ND and all that, but it's heavy. The autofocus for some reason isn't as good as the R5, which is what he personally likes using and
It's
what he
not.
uses. Um, not to, obviously don't even include the speed of the Sony's. I mean, the A7 IV autofocus is just bananas fast and reliable. If you look at some of the higher end YouTubers, air quotes, a lot of them have switched to Sony. Not even just in our niche. I mean, everybody in our niche has switched to Sony.
Yeah.
I went to NAB this year and I didn't see any really Canon people. It was just all Sonys with that Sigma 24 to 70 2.8 or the G Master 16 to 35.
35. Yeah.
Which and then also the Rode Video Mic Pro is still the champion microphone.
Yeah.
Like everybody still uses that.
I still
even
use
though
mine.
Yeah, Sony has that really nice one that just goes
I
straight
don't
onto
like
the
that
hot shoe.
microphone. I
Doesn't sound
tried
good?
it. Not on my voice. I've heard other people use it and they sound good, but what I noticed is like when you're editing your own video all the time, you're like, oh, I don't like it's too sibilant or it's too whatever. Like you can hear it. I didn't like the way my own voice sounded. So I still
Okay.
like that old Video Mic Pro Plus.
Yeah.
That's still the one I use a lot of the time. But yeah,
And
you're right. It seems like everyone's shooting on Sony. And I have to say the A7 IV is my favorite Sony camera right now. The image to me is better than the FX3 and the A7S III, but it overheated on me 3 times into like 3 weeks. And I can't have that happen. Like that. I can't have a camera overheat.
That's unacceptable. Yeah. And I think that's why, like, if I were to go to Sony, even though I agree, I like a lot of the features of the 4, the sharpness, and it seems like the color science based on your tests is marginally better.
Marginally, yeah.
I would rather have the better EVF, the reliable, lack of overheating, the better screen, the better low light, the 120, all that stuff is great. But I think it's easy for us, and I'm sure you can relate, Josh, and maybe a lot of our people who are listening, it's easy for us to just get wrapped up in the gear and to get into gear lust and kind of that whole world. And like, it's important to like just go outside, take a deep breath, and realize it doesn't matter. Like,
doesn't matter.
everything's so good. Like we've said already. Maybe even force yourself to make an entire project on a cheaper or older camera to remind yourself like where we came from, because all these little things that we're arguing about are very minor nitpicks. But it is something we deal with on a daily basis, and it's something that I think is unique to our little community, and so that's why people are listening to this show right now. So, but I just have to acknowledge that at the end of the day, of course, we realize this is all not that important, but
but it's fun and we enjoy it, so we're going to talk about it.
Exactly. So I'm excited. So I pre-ordered the R7, and this is exciting to me because I think the R7 with the C70, for me personally, is the pair that I've been wanting, because I really don't care about full frame as much as a lot of other people do. I've been shooting on the Micro Four Thirds Olympus camera as my stills camera for years, and I love it. I like the small form factor. I love the tiny lenses. And I'm actually even looking forward to the tiny little kit lens that I pre-ordered with my R7 and putting that on the C70. It's like an 18 to 150 or something. But they're still cheap kit lenses. And like, it looks to me like Canon just took the EFM, like the M50 lens, and just put an R mount on it, because it looks like it's just kind of balloons out on the mount side. So that makes me a little hopeful for the fact that any EFM lens could just be retrofitted for an R mount, which means there's a really solid little 35 1.4 1.8 or something. There's a 22 f2. There's these Sigma 16-1.4, the Sigma 30-1.4, and the 56-1.4. Those would be fabulous on the C70. But that's kind of the issue that you and I have really struggled with the C70 in particular, is the lenses. The R lenses, the RF lenses are fabulous. The 15 to 35 2.8 is incredible. The 24 to 70 2.8 is ridiculously good. But on this crop sensor, you're not getting the full use of that lens, and you're also having to sacrifice the weight and the size of it on this camera, and you're not actually getting the benefit of the weight and size. Like, if this camera was full frame, I wouldn't care about the size of the lens, because I know I'm getting the full use of that lens on that sensor. So now I'm like, okay, do I use the turbo booster on the C70, which Canon makes? It's basically a Metabone speed booster just made by Canon. And that's what I'm doing right now as we're filming this. I'm shooting this on the 16 to 35 2.8 at, I believe, 28 millimeters with the turbo booster. So that gives me an f2 in air quotes aperture. And that seems to be probably the best use of this camera, is to use the turbo booster for most instances. But then you got a big, heavy, chunky body and situation with the lenses, the older lenses that don't autofocus as well. They don't resolve as well. It's just kind of a mess. And I wish that we had better APS-C or Super 35 RFS lenses available. But right now, there's none available technically. But once I get my R7 in, now I've got a stills camera that's crop sensor and a video camera that's crop sensor. I'm just kind of banking on, over the next 2 years or so, hopefully some lenses will come out that'll be perfect for it, because then it'd be a tiny little compact system. But anyways, I just talked a bunch, but you definitely, I know, struggle with this predicament as well.
Yeah, so it's funny that people listening or watching this, Dave and I have been going back and forth about C70 lenses for so long, because I feel like the analogy I like to use is like putting a square peg in a round hole. Like, that's kind of how I feel with the C70, because I think if they just came out with it and it had an EF mount, no one would think twice. Like, okay, Super 35, Canon cinema camera, put the Sigma 18 to 35 on it. Like, everyone knows what to do, right? Like C200, C300, like, we know what to do. But they put the RF mount on there, and I know you talked about this in your C70 review, and I've talked about this a ton, the issues that I've had with the speed booster, and you've had with the purple circle, the crazy flaring and the sort of washed out look. And so for me, like, I gave up on it because I just don't want to stress, like we talked about, with overheating. Like, I don't want to be out shooting and lose a shot because there's some weird flare issue. Like, I can't deal with that. A lot of times you're shooting documentaries, you don't have a chance to go back and shoot it again, right? If it's a YouTube video, maybe you can go and shoot it again. But so I agree about that part of it. And then the RF lenses. And so they work incredibly well on the C70. They're beautiful. The autofocus is great. They have stabilization, those big zooms, but they seem to just be kind of a waste, and they're very expensive on those cameras. And I've been shooting full frame for a few years now. And so my workflow has been simplified to having a 15 to 35 or 16 to 35 and a 24 to 70. And for me, those two lenses kind of do everything. And so then when I get into the crop sensor world, it just doesn't really work for me. Like, that workflow is kind of broken up. And then with the R5C, I put those lenses are so beautiful, those RF zooms. And you put that on the R5C, and all of a sudden, like, it just unlocks those lenses. And I don't think those have really been unlocked in video yet. And so that's my impression with the R5C. Okay, sorry, I talked a lot too, Dave.
No. So enter the R5C into Josh Sattin's life. So let's begin the R5C discussion. I had a great discussion with Tyler Stallman when the camera first came out on this podcast. He shared his initial findings, but that was a pre-release, and he also was coming at it from an angle of like, well, it's just an R5 that shoots video. I'm going to use my C70 for video. Like, his attitude was kind of like, I prefer the C70. You now are telling me that you actually prefer the R5C, and I would just love to hear your thoughts and your findings. You had some great videos this week. Everybody go check out Josh Sattin's camera review channel. We'll link it in the show notes and in the description below for sure. Go check it out. It's amazing, highly detailed, great stuff. I love what you're doing on that channel, Josh. So yeah, just tell me, about the R5C.
Well, thanks, Dave. I don't know when this podcast is going up, but I just made a video that's like detailed, long form C70 versus R5C, and I break it all down in my opinion. But yeah, so the R5C, when it got announced, and I saw like Tyler's video and some other people that had first hands on it before it got sent out, I was like, I am not interested in this camera. I was like, no C-Log 2, mini or micro, whatever side, the tiny one, the HDMI port, no IBIS. I'm like, what is going on? Like, why did they just put a fan on the R5 and like move on? Like, we're good. But then when it started coming out and people started getting their hands on it, and I thought, you know what? Like, I just had Sony then, but now I have a C70. Let me try out the R5C. And there's a couple of things that really blew me away. And the biggest one is the dynamic range. So it is different than the R5. And I think a lot of people didn't expect that, because when they put the cinema operating system in there, somehow it unlocked another 1.5 stops of dynamic range. And, I don't have a way to measure that, but Gerald Undone does. And he reported on that in his review video. And I noticed right away the first time I shot with the R5C and I was shooting in C-Log 3, I remember what C-Log 3 looked like on the R5, and they're not the same. Like there is a lot more latitude there
What?
in the shadows.
That's so strange. I don't
I
understand that.
I agree completely. I noticed it, but I don't have a way to measure it, right? And I didn't have an R5 to compare it against. But I saw Gerald's results, and he has a scientific way of testing it and has his numbers from before. And the more people are getting their hands on it, the more it's very close to the C70. I mean, I did a video that was like C70 versus R5C dynamic range where I pushed into the highlights and the shadows. There's probably a half a stop difference between those two cameras in the shadows.
Wow.
It's a lot closer than I thought, and it's on par with like the Sony cameras. So
Wow.
there's that. That's the big thing is dynamic range. The other thing is the second base ISO of 3200. I know that a lot of people praise the Sony cameras for having that second base of 12,800. But for me, I don't wind up in that like high ISO range very often. For me, like if I'm bumping up the ISO, like I'm in that 3200, 4000. And I want that. That was the same thing with A7 IV, it cuts off in the middle there versus having to go all the way up to 12,800. So I started looking at the image and I love, this is again, personal preference with all this stuff, but like I like oversampled images. I like that 8K oversample, the 7K oversample. Like cameras like the Komodo's got a 6K oversample, I believe.
Mhm.
It's personal preference. And now they're making cameras that don't overheat because they're putting fans in them. And I just like the image better. And I do like full frame. If I can have it, I'm going to choose full frame over Super 35. This is all personal opinion for me. But
Yeah.
again, dynamic range, like that was the thing about the R5 was like, it just didn't have the dynamic range. It was weak in my opinion.
Now, let me ask you this. Have you found that the R5C has similar ISO performance, like low light performance to the C70, or is the C70 better in low light?
I didn't do a head to head on those. I did a video comparing the R5C with the FX3 because that's the one I was like, how good is it against the one that everyone loves, like in terms of low light. I have to go and look. The thing is, you have the DGO sensor in the C70, which obviously cleans up the shadows a ton. But I don't know at what point one starts winning. They're just, it's a lot. The R5C is a lot cleaner than I thought it was going to be in terms of noise level. So, and the C70 doesn't have a second base ISO, so that's part of it too.
Yeah. Okay. But again, the thing with Canon that kind of drives me crazy is like you get these, you kind of have to pick your battles. You pick what you value more because you're losing like I have better battery life with the
Oh,
C70.
it's
I've got the
terrible in the
built-in
R5C.
I've got the built-in ND with the C70, but you've got an EVF, which I don't understand why they didn't put even just a tiny little EVF on the C70. That would have been nice. Um, you've got the smaller form factor. I think a lot of people underestimate the size of the R5C. It really is just kind of like a R5. It doesn't
It
feel
is.
much different. The pictures kind of make it look chunkier than it really is. Does it feel smaller than the C70 when you hold it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, for people that are watching video, here's my R5C. I put a battery grip on it just because I get double the battery. The battery's atrocious on this. When you put the battery grip on it, I don't have my C70 near me, but it's about the same size in terms of height, but it's definitely not as thick and it's not as like heavy and big because it doesn't have NDs, it doesn't have all that other
Mhm.
stuff in it. But the beauty about this camera is that I'm want to really call it like the Swiss Army knife because you can build it up or build it down. And like, if I want to just take this out on a hike and do a vlog, I just strip it down to just the camera. I put one battery in it and throw a couple batteries in my backpack and I'm good. But if you need to add a V mount, you need to add the Tascam unit to get XLR inputs. Like you can do all that, but it then becomes this like, rigged out situation that's not like a little package like the C70. You pull a thing out of your bag, it's got everything right there. Like it's a workhorse.
Yeah.
So it gives you more options.
I think I think you and I are the exception when it comes to the users of these cameras. At the end of the day, the C70 on a production, in a documentary style or even just a multicam setup is probably the correct option. Whereas the R5C is great on a gimbal. It's great for the hybrid shooter, obviously. In fact, I would argue that the R5C is really the only true real hybrid camera that's ever existed because not only can it take stills and video, but it's the best video and the best stills that Canon offers, and it's full cinema
Yeah,
menus and full cinema everything when you're in cinema mode, and then it's full photo mode when you go to photo mode. It's kind of amazing. I've never seen anything like it, and it's kind of one of a kind right now.
I agree. I wish the FX3 did the same thing. And I think that's what Sony needed to do with that camera is like make it a video camera when it's in video mode. Cause we all know we've all been shooting on mirrorless and DSLR cameras for a long time that like you shoot in the stills operating menu, you know what that's about. But when they put waveform and false color and shutter angle and, you know, all those things in the R5C, when you pick it up, you're using a video camera. And
Yeah.
that's a huge difference for people that really appreciate that for sure.
And I guess technically, if you really want to have some form of built-in NDs, you could use. Canon does make the really nice RF to EF variable neutral density adapter, and it puts the filter behind the lens. But now again, you're in the same
EF
situation
glass.
as you are with
Yep.
the C70 using EF glass. But it's cool that that's an option. So yeah, but one of the main reasons in my book why I would choose the R5C is just the fact that it's full frame. So you're getting that full use of the lens now. So you're using the 15 to 35 2.8 with the IS in combination with the camera that has digital stabilization. They got rid of the IBIS, which I'm okay with. I don't like
I'm
Canon's
okay with that
IBIS.
too. I'm fine with it. Yeah.
Canon needs to work on their IBIS. I think it's really wobbly and kind of bad, honestly. So, I mean, it helps obviously, but my shooter Connor owns an R5 and he's been shooting with that quite a bit with me. And a lot of the footage, I can see some kind of wobble, warpy kind of stuff on the edges, and I've never seen that on my, on the A7S or on my Olympus camera. So I think Canon should continue to work on that, make that better, hopefully through firmware updates and newer cameras. But yeah, why would somebody pick the R5C over an A7S? Like the A7S is cheaper. It's some would argue maybe even better in some ways. Like why would if somebody was coming to you who's a pro videographer who's starting fresh, coming from maybe a Blackmagic camera and they're wanting to upgrade, or even a T2i or something like that. Like they want to upgrade to a better camera. Why would you lead somebody to an R5C over an A7S? Because the A7S still is just an incredible workhorse camera.
I think the big thing, like you mentioned, is the hybrid part of it. So if you're taking photos, like it's an R5 like in there, which is
Yeah.
arguably one of the best photography cameras on the market still, even almost 2 years after it came out. And you have that beautiful, 45 megapixel sensor in there and takes great photos.
Yes.
So that's a benefit. But I think the operability, is it the word? The way the way it operates.
I'm sure it is.
When you have the cinema operating system and you have all those, exposure tools and all those options in there, that's kind of where I think it really shines. It really feels like a video camera when you're using it. Also, having shot on Sony for a long time, the LCD screens are totally inferior to the Canon ones. And I feel
Really?
like anyone's owned a Sony camera, like will admit to that. Like the LCD screens are not nearly as good as the Canon ones. So, and I think at the end of the day, it's kind of personal preference. It's the way the image looks coming out of the camera. Again, I like the oversampled image. I know a lot of people, especially in the filmmaking world, really like that sort of softer, more filmic look. But to me, I'd rather have the detail and be able to soften it with a diffusion filter or in post, because going the other way around is really hard to do. It's not nearly as good as like starting with sharper, more detail, and then kind of softening it if you want to.
Sure.
So I'd like to have that option. I think those are the main things. But the other thing is ecosystem and lenses and who else are you shooting with? And, what other cameras do you have that you need for your operation? So you can't go wrong with the Sony cameras, though. I mean, they do everything really, really well. And I have to say the A7S is underrated as a photography camera because even though it's 12 megapixels and people think you need more, the photos that come out of that camera are beautiful. Like they look great. I've shot some great photography on that camera. So, and again, that EVF is beautiful too. So,
yeah,
which one do you want to go with?
Yeah, I don't know if you are familiar with Terry Warfield, but he's a friend of mine and a YouTuber, and he recently got some Canon cameras to review, and he's been a Sony shooter for a while. And his kind of example I kind of agree with. It's almost like Sony is kind of like an Android phone. It's got like the latest and greatest. Often Android phones, like Samsung phones, have the newer kind of cutting edge tech, whereas Apple with the iPhone, it might be 2 or 3 years before you see something that a Samsung phone was doing. But it's because they really take time to perfect it and to make sure that it's simple and easy to use, and everything just kind of works straight out of the box. Whereas the cutting edge Android phones, they're fun and exciting for people who are into that, but sometimes things break and there's like little hacks and bugs and issues with it, and little janky things that go with it. Um, Obviously, it's not the most perfect comparison because it's not the same uh, thing, but Sony is cutting edge. They're always pushing the limits. They're putting features in the cameras uh, that you just don't see anywhere else. But Canon is just good old reliable. Like everything just works. It's smooth. It's easy to use. The colors look fantastic. The lenses are wonderful. It's just better to hold in the hand all as well. Like I don't know. It's just kind of, you should really just go to a store and play with them and see what you think. Rent one if you're curious about it. But I definitely think the color science argument is over. I think like if you really want to shoot on a Sony camera, the color science shouldn't be a reason for you to choose against it, because for years the Sony color science was terrible, but they really have solved it. It's definitely not, I do think objectively the Canon color science is technically better in my opinion, and I think you agree. That being said, the Sony color science is still really good as well with these newer cameras.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like the Canon colors better because it gets me to the finish line sooner. That's kind of how I feel about it. So, but I've gotten great results out of the Sony cameras. I think that analogy is good. The Android iPhone analogy until recently. And I think if you look at the R5 with the overheating and that sort of thing, Canon was the reliable camera, but they're trying to play catch up
true.
now, right? Like they were just doing their thing forever, and now they're like they have competition, and they're trying to play catch up. And R&D is not quick, like think about mirrorless
It's
cameras.
true.
Sony's been making them for a long time, so I think they're really pushing the envelope with this stuff. And I think there's quirks in these cameras that we're going to sit here and nitpick and complain about, but overall
Yeah.
usability and, like you said, like the grips, like the way it feels, the menu system, the colors that come out of the camera, like without having to fuss with them too much, might be
Mhm.
closer to what you're looking for. I agree completely.
Totally. A lot of people don't realize this. And I met a Canon executive at NAB a couple years ago, and I was complaining about some things with him. And he was a fairly high up executive. And he said, Dave, I got to tell you something. Our camera department is only a third of our business. The other 2/3 is medical and printers. So at the end of the day, we don't really care because we're making plenty of money selling medical equipment to doctors and printers to corporate America. That being said, a lot of that technology and the R&D that they have in the medical field, like they make x-rays and all sorts of interesting like ultrasound things as well. Like they really understand ergonomics because they work in medical, so like they're able to take some of those people and have them help design like ergonomic grips. So that's why you see like Canon just has really ergonomic feeling grips, because they take people from like their medical department to come in and like observe the grips and be like, oh, actually that could cause, some tendonitis or whatever, like I think a lot of people don't think about that. Whereas Sony is just like everything's sharp, small, compact, like, forget tendonitis or ergonomics or whatever. So I don't know. I think that's fascinating to remember too, that like Canon is, a big company that does other things. So when you kind of complain about certain things, it's like, well, yeah, they're making other products. But then again, same is true for Sony. They make phones, they make laptops, they make TVs. I mean, they
Sensors.
make yeah, Sony. So basically, if people don't realize this, there's only two companies that make sensors: Canon and Sony. That's it. Nikon buys Sony sensors. Olympus buys Sony sensors. Fuji, all these companies basically are licensing sensors from Sony, and then Canon makes their own sensors. There's only two companies that have sensor fabs in Japan. So I think that's interesting. That's why Canon colors are so unique. Nobody has colors like it, because they only work for themselves. Basically, their sensor fab is only for Canon. Although there are rumors that Red has been licensing from them because the Komodo has very strangely similar specs to the R6, and it's got the dual pixel autofocus and the RF mount, and they're using Canon batteries on the Komodo. There's even some rumors that Canon, I think, was going to buy Red or something like that. So very interesting little rumors, out there with that, but I don't know if it's true. But um, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. These cameras are great. Here's my thought. I have been going back and forth on the R5C and the C70, and I called you and we talked about it. I have landed on just keeping the C70. I'm a huge fan of it. I love being able to just plug it in to the wall like I'm doing right now, plug in my nice full size HDMI. In this environment, the turbo booster doesn't give me any problems, so I'm happy with how that looks. And believe it or not, I've been using this camera as my like family home video camera, which is ridiculous. But I used the tiny little 10 to 18. It's like a EFS lens. It's a 10 to 18 millimeter with IS built in, and it looks amazing. And it's super like smooth and stabilized, and it's so teeny tiny on the camera. I just used the little, RF to EF adapter, the non-turbo booster version, and that's like my home video camera. I don't even put a mic on it because the C70 has a fabulous built-in mic, which I never even knew. I just started kind of experimenting with it, and I'm like, this actually sounds really good as a built-in mic. So it's really small, compact, and I've got built-in ND and long battery life. And I look like a weirdo running around like the aquarium following my kids with this thing. But I've been very happy with my home video now because it looks fantastic. Like, look at 20 years from now, I'm going to be so thankful that I was actually using a real camera as my home video camera filming my kids. So um,
Well, I think
I don't
that's
know.
just that's a statement to like where we're at right now. I mean, we're able to carry around these crazy cool cameras for shooting family stuff or making quick YouTube
Yeah.
videos or whatever. And I don't think you can go wrong with either the C70 or the R5C. Like they're both amazing, and it's really about what you're looking for and how you want to use it. If, as you said, like if you're on bigger productions, if you're in studios, like the C70 is incredible. Like it's a workhorse. You plug it in, big HDMI, all that kind of stuff. The other thing I want to talk about between those two cameras is the autofocus, because
Sure. Yeah.
I
I'm
know
curious to
that.
hear your findings. Yeah.
So I think when it first got announced, I made a few videos, I think, about it. And one thing I was like, I heard that the autofocus was not the same as the R5, which it's not. And that was alarming for a lot of people because a lot of the reasons people liked the R5 was the autofocus in video is incredible. But then it goes into the cinema operating system, so it has a different, focus system, very similar to the C70. So you still get things like face only, like all the stuff that you get in the C70, very similar settings. But they added eye detect on top of that. So I did a side by side test in that video that I was talking about. It probably came out or is coming out or whatever. It's a little bit better than the C70. And I also think that one of the issues I originally ditched the C70, my first go around with it, was the autofocus let me down a good amount. And I couldn't really rely on it in a lot of situations, especially if the subject was backlit at all or just slightly underexposed or dark skin tones. I really struggled with that. That was something that kept me from wanting to use it in documentary shoots because I'm out, I'm trying to film the thing, I'm trying to interview the person, I'm trying to put the story together, and then I look over and the thing's like hunting, and I'm like, I can't deal with this. Like I'm paying for autofocus, like I need it to work. But I think
Yeah.
the R5C is, I would just say, slightly better than the C70, but I also think the C70 has improved with firmware updates over the last year. I just noticed because when I got the camera this time around and I updated the firmware on it, like it's better than it was. It's not like
Mm.
R5 level or Sony level, but it's better for sure.
Yeah. It has gotten better. I use the face only mode a lot for something like this. It's perfect. Um, but yeah, it's not as reliable when you're just running and gunning. And Connor has kind of complained about it because he's been using it, and he's just using the 24 to 105 on it, and yeah, it doesn't track as well as the R5 does. And it's odd that the R5C doesn't have the same autofocus as the R5 because it's the same camera technically, but like I
Different
guess
operating
it's something to
systems.
do with the cinema operating system, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's some differences
which
there. I haven't found too many other ones other than the dynamic range. Um, the other big thing that I think is worth mentioning with the R5C is the ability to adjust the noise reduction in the camera, which,
mhm,
and we're getting to the nitty gritty here, but on cameras like the A7S III and the FX3, there is baked in noise reduction that you cannot turn off. And so that's a big difference to the FX6 where you can adjust the noise reduction. And
mhm.
so there are times where I don't like what the noise reduction is doing on the FX3, and I have the ability to change that in the R5C. So that's another little benefit there. If you're really trying to dial in settings in the camera, that's another difference.
Does the C70 have that? I've never
Yep.
even played around with
Yep.
it.
Yep. If you
Okay,
go into the like picture profile, you go to C-Log2 and you unprotect it, you can go in there and change the noise reduction.
gotcha. Okay, yeah, I'll mess around with that. I'm curious to see what that looks like. Yeah,
I don't think the C70 really needs a lot of it, but it's so clean.
yeah. The DGO sensor is just like so magical. It really is. I
Agreed.
mean, you got to remember like it's a C300 Mark III in there, which is like a very expensive high end cinema camera. So what's kind of your situation? Are you going to keep both? Is that what you've decided?
No, I haven't decided yet. I'm kind of
Buy
back and
another
forth.
R5C?
I thought about it. I think for right now, just because in the near future, I don't need two high end cameras. I just don't for the work that I'm doing right now.
Yeah,
I might sell one and buy something else to play with for a little while, just in
sure.
terms of creating content and learning new gear and all that kind of stuff. Leaning towards the R5C for me, just because I love full frame. I love the oversample. It's
Yeah,
smaller if I'm taking it out for a hike or something, which I do like to make those videos where I go out and walk around and talk about stuff.
totally.
Um, so that's kind of where I'm leaning right now, but it's really hard to sell the C70, Dave. Like it's just such an awesome camera. Like it
I
really
know.
is. It's I felt the same way about the FX3. Love that camera. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I'm not really sure, but right now I'm not doing client work. I'm working on my farm channel, my the course I talked about earlier in the show tonight, and
hmm,
so for me it's like mainly YouTube and that kind of stuff. So I don't need like two big cinema
sure.
cameras. I'll put that in air quotes.
Yeah. Um, what kind of? I'm curious because you go hiking a lot, and it looks like you're using a tripod. What's your main tripod that you
It
use when you're out and
is
about?
I think it's I don't remember. It's like a small carbon fiber.
It's not the Peak Design one.
It's not the Peak Design one. My buddy
It's like a
Chris told
Searu
me
or something.
it's either that or a Benro. I can't remember. I'd have to go grab it. Um, yeah,
It doesn't
it's
matter.
small. It's carbon fiber. It's like I didn't want to get the Peak Design. I think this one's a little bit more durable.
Well, the Peak
Yeah,
Design's too short. I'm a little too tall for it.
doesn't
So
it have the like
I'm
this thing in the middle that you can raise. Doesn't it have that.
yeah.
It's
Even when
still
it's
too
raised
short.
up all the way, it's too. At least for me, as I'm right at 6 feet, so it's a little too short for me personally. But yeah, I do like the design of the Peak Design though. It's so well thought out, well engineered. But what about the flip screen on your C70? Is it better now that you've like repurchased it or whatever?
Yeah, it is. So the original C70 I had, I think, was in the first lot, which I think you got it right away.
Yeah,
And I
mine's
think
flopping around everywhere. Yeah,
so.
I still haven't sent it in.
Yeah, so I sent that one in a Canon. I got it back in my hands in less than 2 weeks, totally free. The only thing I paid for was shipping there, and they paid for shipping back. And it was free. So
Okay.
I don't know if they're still offering that service. The cool thing was when I called them, I said, "Hey, I bought this used. This is what's going on." I was very upfront with them. I was like, "I don't have a receipt. Like I bought it used." They're like, "Just send it in. Just take everything off the camera. No battery, no memory card. Send it in." They sent it back to me. Felt amazing when it got back. The C70 I
Nice.
just picked up was obviously in a newer batch, and it's fine. I mean, it doesn't have the same like
Ruggedness.
reliability. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like it's not as confirming of like the R5C or the R5 or I guess I've never touched an
Why
R6, but
not? It's so dumb that they
so dumb.
they
Yeah, the
have
build.
They have a warehouse full of all these flip screens. Like, why don't they put that on here? Like, it's so bizarre.
My thought is that the C70 screen is wider, and I think most people don't realize that, but all the mirrorless cameras have a more, was a 3x2 for taking
Sure.
photos.
Yeah.
So you're obviously not doing that on the C70. So they made a different screen for that camera. I think that's really where it
Sure.
comes from.
Yeah, it reminds me of the little camcorder screens that they've made before on little camcorders and stuff. And one of the things that I think is weird about the C70 is the tactile feel of it too. It's like it feels like cheap plastic sandpaper. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's a strange feeling
Yeah, I
compared.
was trying to compare the R5C with the C70 in terms of that, like the grip. I think it's roughly the same material, but maybe like just because it's bigger, it just feels weirder. Like when it's
Yeah.
more compact, it just feels different. But yeah, it just the C70 has a weird build quality like feel to it. Like when you pick it up, you're like,
Yeah.
what? This is weird.
But I love my 4 audio inputs and built-in NDs and all that. So it
100%.
is what it is.
So I ordered the Tascam unit, so that'll help me with XLR inputs because I do use XLR microphones a
Yeah.
lot. So what did you decide, Dave? Let's get down to the C70 lens situation here. What did you decide on? Or are you not decided?
Yeah, I bought the R7 with the kit
Okay.
lens, and then I think I'm just going to keep the turbo booster and my full frame lenses for now. But as things come out for the R7, I'm hoping that we'll see some really nice APS-C cropped RFS lenses. If that's the case, then I can start slowly ditching my full frame lenses and the turbo booster. So I'm kind of here, like I'm here for the long haul. Like I'm expecting to kind of wait it out over the next like 3 years probably. And Sigma made a really wonderful cropped censored. I think it's like a 15 to 50 2.8 or something like that, or something like that, designed specifically for Sony APS-C. And I think it's also Leica mount APS-C as well. It's like a proper 24 to 70 2.8 for APS-C, and I would love to see them do that on RF. Sigma actually hasn't made any RF lenses,
Yeah, I want to
so
know
I don't
what's
know
up with that.
why. Yeah,
I
why
think
not?
Canon's holding on to it, or I don't know. I've heard a lot of like discussion, but no one really knows. Like, why don't you see Sigma lenses or Tamron lenses or
Yeah,
anybody else? Like, I think once Sigma starts making RF lenses, it's going to change the game a lot. Like you said, if they adapt those, the 1630 was a 56,
yeah,
those would be incredible on any of those cameras. Those are super sharp
yeah.
lenses.
It's
I don't.
f1.4. They're small, compact.
Those
It's
lenses are
great.
so sharp. Yeah, I think that would be cool. I think though, which we had talked about offline, also was that Canon really hasn't had professional crop lenses before, other than
No.
the SIFT 17 to.
Yeah, which I own. The 17 to 55 2.8 IS. Yeah,
Yeah, that's an old timey lens at this point.
super old. It looks great.
But
It still has great bokeh, but
yeah, and it's a big lens for a crop sensor lens for sure.
it's lightweight though. It
Oh, it
looks
is.
big, but
It
it
looks big.
weighs almost nothing. It feels like you're holding just a lens of plastic air.
Well, I
So
think if they're serious about their crop sensor cameras, which it seems like they are, like the R7 is a very promising camera, and I think it's going to do really well, but it needs to have the lenses to back it up. And are people just going to be using the inexpensive primes like the 16, the 35, the 50? Are they going to be using those on crop sensor cameras? I mean, that's a big question mark. If they can put
I
out some pro level crop sensor lenses, that'd be really cool.
I'm kind of worried that Canon just doesn't care and they're just going to say, just buy a RF lens. Like, because if you look at all the ads for the R7, obviously, like, the pros, the pro bird photographers and sports photographers that were using it in a lot of their ads, of course, they're using all the L mount or the L series RF lenses. So it's like, yeah, just buy the 70 and 200 and this 15 to 35. It's great on there. It's like, no. Give me like a real good crop lens. I don't know. It's frustrating, but
Well, I think the crop sensors for Canon, like you talk about, like the 7D Mark II, like a lot of people are using those for wildlife and long reach stuff. So everyone's like, "Oh, it's great. It's fast for readout. You can put these big lenses on and get extra reach." So maybe that's more of the market. Then they're like, "Oh, get
yeah.
the 70 to 200 or the 100 to 500 or those other zoom lenses, and then you have all that extra reach on the R7." Maybe that's the target market. I'm not really sure.
Do you know about the let me see what it is. It's a RF. I think it's a 800. Yeah. Do you know
Oh,
about
the
this? Eight.
F11.
Yeah. So it's only $1,000 for an 800 millimeter lens, which is like unheard of. And this is the beauty of mirrorless. But you can even put a teleconverter on there and make it even tighter. But it's a fixed f11, which when you're outside and for the use case of this, that's totally fine. You even still get some bokeh because you're so freaking zoomed in. Um, I've seen a lot of people talk about this thing. It's like it's kind of a cheaper lens in terms of optics, but it's just nuts that you can get an 800 millimeter telephoto for under $1,000. It's
And
pretty
then you put that
cool.
on your R7 and you can, go nuts.
Yeah, exactly. The reviews I've seen of the R7, because it's got the Digic X processor in it. So it's from the R3. So the speed, apparently the autofocus and the speed on it is nuts. So I'm really curious to see how it performs. And I'm definitely going to be doing some side by side comparisons with the C70. And if it's close, if not better, like, I don't know, I might even just switch to the R7.
Focus is going to be better. I mean, the R3 autofocus is incredible. My question marks always are dynamic range and overheating. Those are my question
Yeah.
marks because it's an oversampled image with no fan. Like,
Yeah.
how long are we going to get with that in the heat?
Well, I mean, the videos I've seen, people were running it for 2 hours with no overheating. So we'll see. But um, it still won't beat the C70 in terms of obviously video features. But I think the C70 and the R7 are a nice pair because they're both the same sensor size and I can just keep all the same lenses. I could just do all crop lenses if I really want to, or even use the turbo booster. I'm sure the turbo booster will work on the R7 as well. So we'll
I
see.
think
But
I think that's a great thing to think about though is B cam for the C70 or B cam for the R5C because I don't think there is a good option for the R5C right now for a cheaper camera to match it in terms of full frame.
exactly.
Um,
I'm not
I
a fan of
think
the R6. It
have you
overheats a
used it
lot,
before?
and I've used it like just somebody just handed it to me, and I've kind of just messed around with it. But my buddy Connor has used it, and he said it overheats just as bad as the R5, if not worse. And the color science is a little whack on it as well. It's like it kind of shifts into the yellows, which is strange. So it's just kind of like if you're only shooting on the R6, it's fine, but um, yeah, it's an odd camera. So I think this R7 may be a really solid, and it's also still very expensive. So this R7 is a great option because it's like 1,400 or $1,500. So which is pretty cheap for what you're getting. An oversampled 7K, 4K 10 bit with continuous recording with great
Yeah, it's pretty
autofocus.
crazy. They put C-Log 3 in there and like
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing for sure. I think Canon's now just throwing everything in every camera, which I love to see because that's like a Sony move for sure.
Yeah, they're having to keep up because Sony is eating their lunch for sure. Did you saw my video, right? The DJI video?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about it. How are you feeling about everything right now?
I'm really excited. I haven't felt this way in a while, and I'm just I feel very focused and excited about this new direction. For a long time, I felt a little disgruntled by the industry, and I wanted to do things that were a little bit more creative and different. And I always felt like I was just hitting a brick wall, with infusing that into a review. But this was the first time I really just kind of embraced this new format of just entertainment first that happens to be around filmmaking. And it seemed to perform fairly well for me. It didn't get a million views or anything like that, but my channel has essentially been dead for like 6 or 7 months, and there was a previous host, as well. So I'm really having to kind of get the channel back to life, anyways. And it performed really well. Great click through rate. I think it's performing 5.5 times better than any video that I've posted in the last 10 videos or whatever. So at least that's what YouTube Studio tells me. So um, yeah, I'm just having a lot of fun with it, and I'm real excited about what's next. And if you haven't seen it, go check it out on the Dave Mays channel. So I just wanted to
Well,
plug that. at the end of this show
Abs-
here. But
Absolutely, Dave. And I think, since we've connected, I don't know however long ago that was, a year and a half or so ago, maybe, I don't know, I have no
yeah,
idea. Time is crazy. I've just been so excited you've been like stirring all these ideas around for years now. And I'm like so happy to see you just like go for it and put all your energy in there and all your focus. And I just can't wait to see what comes out of what you're creating in the next couple videos, next few years. It's just cool to see different things because I know for me, maybe I just been watching too much of these videos, but everything's kind of similar at this point. And, like it's really cool to see people doing different things. I think it's really refreshing, and I just, want to cheer you on. That's all.
thanks, dude. Well, I brought it up, so I appreciate you
I was
going
going to
along
ask you
with
about it, man. I was going to ask you about it.
it. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's nothing wrong with nerding out about gear. I still love it, and I almost want to start another channel so that I can still kind of do that. But I think that would be splitting my focus too much right now, and I just need to kind of hunker down on just this one concept. So I'm trying to kind of zoom out a little bit and hit a broader audience. This was my first kind of transitional video. It still is pretty niche. If you're not interested in drones, you may not find any value in this video other than it being just kind of silly. But I'm trying to figure out a way to basically create an entertainment channel that's based around filmmaking. And I'm a filmmaker and I have filmmaker friends, but anybody can watch it and enjoy it. Kind of like how Mythbusters was so entertaining to watch, even though you're not, a VFX artist, or Mark Rober, who's one of the biggest, YouTubers. He's an engineer. Like I have no interest in engineering. I don't know anything about engineering, but I love all of his videos. So I think there's a way to do that in our filmmaking kind of world, and nobody's really figured it out yet. So I'm really trying hard to find that, because I think there's a lot of potential there. And for a long time, I was frustrated because it felt like, well, nobody's doing this, so it clearly must not work. And over the last 3 or 4 months, I've been talking to some kind of consultants and different people I've been working with, and they're all like, just because nobody's doing it doesn't mean it's not possible. In fact, the fact that you're thinking this way may be a good thing, because you might create a new kind of niche. And I'm like, well, that would be really cool if that was true, but I don't I don't know if that's possible. I have to work really, really hard. That's basically the only thing here is, I mean, that video took me 2 months to make that one, and I'm
Yeah.
already like stressing out about the next one. But the next one is going to be called, I'll give it away here because not many people listen to this, but I shot 100 films in 24 hours. so, so it's going to be extremely exhausting, but it'll be
Well,
fun.
I just want to chime in about a couple things. I mean, my experience with YouTube and the success I've had on the farming channel is what I've realized. I've realized a lot of things, and I'm going to be making more videos about this on my video channel too, because I've done a lot of content creation tips and techniques and stuff on there too, because
Yeah.
I've experienced a lot in the last, it's only been 3 years or just over 3 years. Hard work is definitely key. Like people think YouTube is easy. YouTube is like the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Like it is
Yeah.
relentless. You have to constantly push yourself. There's a couple things. One is providing value for your audience. I think that could be educational or entertainment or both.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of times, even with title and thumbnail, like you can get into the weeds about title and thumbnail and strategies there, but providing perceived value through the title and thumbnail, I think is huge.
Yes.
And the other thing is picking your lane and sticking in it is what grows your channel. And your
Mm.
lane is going to be what you find is a space in your niche. Like if you can find that little sliver that you can slide through and sort of open up that wedge and get through, I think that's where YouTube's going to push your videos more because you get traction. And for the farming channel, just I mean, most people who are listening to this have no idea about this niche, about that niche. But for me, like I had been watching YouTube for a few years, and I knew exactly where there was a space for me, and so that's where I
Mm.
aimed at, and it just opened up pretty quickly for me. But that was much less crowded.
That's
But
really reassuring to hear, man. I appreciate that because to me, the way that I interpret, like I really have been studying people like Eric, Ryan Trahan, Mr. Beast, all the kind of greats on YouTube right now, the people that are getting, you know, 20 million views a video. And I'm really inspired by the storytelling that's happening kind of at the high level of YouTube right now. It's seeming like it's basically become reality TV with some storytelling going on, or game show meets reality TV, and I just haven't seen that in our niche. And I'm very passionate and authentically just excited and interested in tech and in the camera gear filmmaking niche, but I also think there's room for just having fun within that, and I haven't really seen anybody do that, and so that could be my little wedge, I guess you could say. Well, how can people find you, Josh, on social media and the YouTubes?
Yeah, so if you're interested in camera gear, so if you've gotten this far in the video or on the podcast, you can check out my channel. It's Josh Satin. It's a little bit harder to find because my farming channel kind of takes over. That one is called Josh Satin Farming, but maybe Dave, you can link it up or
Yeah,
whatever. But
it'll definitely
if
be
you type
linked.
in any of these, like type in Josh Satin camera, video, Canon, like I'm sure I'll show up somewhere easy enough to find.
I definitely, honestly, even if you're not into farming, I would recommend everybody go check out the farming channel. That's really where the storytelling and a lot of the interesting stuff is going on with Josh's work, where like the behind the scenes is the Josh Satin channel where he's figuring out which camera to use. But then if you actually want to see that camera being used, go check out the farming channel. And then also, you know, like you said, you're doing this crazy educational course, which I'm really curious to see how you pull that off. That sounds like a ton of work, but it'll
It's
be
been,
very valuable.
yeah, it's been crazy. The modules are somewhere usually between 25 and 45 minutes, and I'm putting out one a week and then doing
Wow,
live Q&As to follow up with them. So yeah, it's
crazy.
been an undertaking, but it's been sort of a way for me to wrap up pretty much everything I've learned and shared into like a concise package. It's killing my analytics on YouTube, but I'm still doing it. So
It's all good, man. I'm excited for you and for your future, and we'll definitely have to have you on again. Uh, I'm sure something else is going to happen that will allow us to talk about nerdy stuff for an hour. So
I
we'll see.
appreciate it, Dave. Anytime. And I'm really excited for your YouTube channel and your journey as well.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.